Hi, my name's Ian Wallace. I call myself the Messed Up Counsellor, which is quite an intriguing name. And the podcast you're about to see is one of many, and we've been doing about a year now. So you can look back and see all the things we've talked about with guests and on my own over the process. A lot of the information I use in the podcast initially came from the first book I wrote in 2011. Why do we do that? What do we do about it? And that came out and was the basis of all my learning, understanding at that time, which is going back a few years now. And that process of understanding how the world works for people, how we can alter, change, and adapt it, was kind of what it was there to do with the initial stages. I've made that now an audiobook as well, so it's available on Amazon as an audio file that you can check out and you can download to your heart's content, and hopefully that will be helpful. In the podcasts, we're trying to look at all sorts of things about human interactions, human dynamics, the world, and how we might understand it more or change it more. So it gives you lots of ideas and tools in order to think about and look at different ways of being or dealing with things. And hopefully that brings people together and makes people more able to connect and communicate. Lots of topics. If you ever want to connect to me, just obviously drop me a comment on the podcast and I shall try as much as possible to reply. And if you've got any ideas of things that we might want to use on the podcasts, then please let me know. My name's Ian Wallace. Thanks for looking and thanks for listening. Hi, and welcome to another podcast from Ian Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor. Today what I'm looking at is anniversarial reactions. So this is delving into something that we all do, every one of us, probably don't realise we're doing it. And it's the subconscious. You know that part of the brain back here which kind of like goes, yeah, a bit scary world, all the things that's locked away in cabinets, filing cabinets in black holes of time. I get a lot of people who will interact with me as a counsellor, and they'll say things like, I've no idea why I did that, that's not normal behaviour for me, it happened and I didn't understand it, all those kind of phrases. And that'll be true, obviously. It's things that they're doing that they don't understand or don't understand why they did what they did. I've grown aware that when people start saying that to me, it's a feeling of unknown, it's a feeling of fear sometimes, Why did I suddenly go and do this, that or the other? But when we delve into that in the counselling room, I'm finding a common theme. When we go into a process of building our world, our life, our understanding, we're not born with the world, we're given the world. From all the experiences we have, the information we get from others, we build our understanding of the world through other people, other scenarios. When we're looking at that, building that world, then we take on board all sorts of things. Now, as we're going through that life, if a situation scenario occurs from a child's perspective, which is always different to an adult's perspective, that there's some kind of emotional trauma. Doesn't matter. Mum and dad split up, a close relative dies, you have to leave the town you lived in and the school, and you went to another school and you had to start again. Those, from a child's perspective, are very awkward from an attachment point of view. So the Vic is very insecure. Now, obviously, we go through the experiences. We go through what's happened and how it's happened. And then we become an adult. Now, when we become an adult, we see the life and the world and different things that would affect us as a child probably will not affect us as much as an adult, usually. So we kind of forget how our child person reacts. We forget what those processes are. And the subconscious, if there's something that's a negative process, tends to hide us away from it if it doesn't think we can cope with it. So it kind of keeps us safe from emotional turmoil. Now, as we went through that experience, we recorded that in our subconscious, because it usually remembers everything, even though we don't know it's remembering everything, because the conscious brain doesn't remember everything, but the subconscious does, in my world. And we then become an adult, as I've said. Say that child's progression at the age of 8 was when it was changed, altered. We had no control over it. So then when we become an adult, when we have children, and I'm seeing it more when we have children, not when we're on our own still or we're single, more so. It does happen other ways, and I'll come back to that, but I'll use this example first. So when we have children and our child gets to 8, then subconsciously we can connect back to that time in our life when we were 8. And we might be more safety conscious with that child because something in our subconscious is saying, oh, it's a bit of a scary world, it's a bit insecure. So we reinforce that process. Now, we've no idea why we're doing that. We've no idea why we've done this particular process of being more safety conscious, for example. So that might, from our 8-year-old child that we have, come across as more claustrophobic. Well, you never used to do this. You used to let me go out and play in the street or whatever. But our adult process is now going to keep that child safer. Now, that's an anniversarial cycle for me. That's a reaction to that 8-year-old I was to the 8-year-old I have. Now, when we do that, we're doing that a lot of the time with all sorts of situation scenarios. So that past process is influencing our present process. So when we go through our life and create disturbances, we create a negative cycle. Say we put things into self-destruct. If we don't allow ourselves to have praise or accolade, or we destroy relationships around us by pushing our partners away. If that happens without any prior understanding, if it just becomes more keeping me safe and pushing unsafe things away, then that might come from a situation scenario in our past. So if, for example, every 3-ish years we have an insecure process, it doesn't have to be the same thing, but if it has an insecure drive, then every 3 years we go through that disconnection process, then what we can do is we can put a relationship into a disconnection process automatically because it's coming up to a 3-year anniversarial cycle. That sounds mad, doesn't it? But I'm sure if you think back in your world and your life, there's times when you've reacted to things but didn't understand why. I have, certainly. And a lot of my clients have. So I can't say that this is absolutely the thing that happens. But on balance, it's what I'm experiencing. So as we go through that, putting our relationship into some kind of self-destruct, we push our partner away because it's coming up to 3 years, then that process means that we will lose that relationship. Now, it might be in a really good relationship. It might be something that we enjoyed. But if that anniversarial cycle is recreating, then the chances are we're going to put it into a self-destruct process. We're going to make it unattainable that we can be with that person. We can make it unpalatable. We can push them away with our words, or maybe not spend as much time with them, or, create a process that makes it harder to be with us in all sorts of different ways. That's happening a lot of the time for all of us, including me. If we can track it, if we can understand it, if we can see where it comes from, then we're more able to do something about it. If we're aware of why we do what we do, we can change it. If we're not aware, we can't. pretty much. So we have to have an understanding and awareness. Now, in order to see if this is happening for you, a way to do that is to do yourself a timeline on your life. And I don't mean everything that's ever happened to you. But if you were certainly pushing relationships away, then I would suggest that comes from some kind of experiential model whereby a detachment had occurred. So what we'd look at on the timeline is we'd focus in on a particular theme or a particular situation scenario, because that's easier for us to do, because we're trying to find those situations, not everything else that's happened to us. And on our timeline, which is just a line on a piece of paper, from our earliest memory to today, we record times when, say, rejection has occurred. So we'd record the age we were, because we're looking for repetitive patterns, and it's easier with ages to see it than it is years. So the age we were, so you won't put 2002, you'd put I was 21, for example. So the age we were, a brief outline of what happened and who was involved. Because if it's females that are detaching from us, not because they want to leave us, because life happens sometimes, then it might be we push females away, but it might be that we connect closer to males. So if we're in a relationship, for example, we could spend more time, and we were male, we could spend more time on our friends, our colleagues, playing hobbies, football, whatever, and spending less time at home, which is with our partner, who would be female in that case, possibly. So I'm looking at a heterosexual couple. But that process means that we would possibly naturally spend more time with the people around us that are male, but we wouldn't connect necessarily as much to the female. And eventually, I would imagine, that person would get cheesed off, or they would just say, well, you're going out, I'm going to go out. There'd be a disruption in the relationship. So as we're going through, we're looking at those things on our timeline. We're looking at situation scenarios where these similar things are occurring. And then we can see whether or not there's a pattern, because the pattern should hopefully become familiar by looking at this timeline. It can be awkward doing timelines because we're using a creative tool, which is pen and paper, and that allows the subconscious sometimes to develop and to be more exposed, because it's creative, it's imagination, if you like. And so sometimes a timeline can be a bit disturbing emotionally. You can see things in there that you hadn't remembered previously to doing it, or you can be emotionally upset by it. So it isn't something that's an easy tool to use sometimes, because our subconscious usually wants us to remember things if it thinks we can cope with them, and it will bring things out that we may have hidden for all sorts of reasons. So when we're looking at that anniversary reactions and we're trying to spot them, have a look for those patterns. Have a look if there's any similarities in the situation scenarios. Is there a particular gender involved? Is there a particular situation circumstance involved? Is there a pattern of time involved? Is there a recreation process going on because my children now are 8, for example? And if you can have a look at that, you can start delving into what might be the triggers for this behavioural process. A lot of people kind of use situation scenarios. Say, for example, I've got a person in front of me, male or female, and they've done something completely out of character. Maybe they've bought themselves an extravagant item, for example. Classic one is a 40-something person buying a motorbike or a flashy car or a sports car. And that's completely out of character, and maybe they didn't have the money to do it, so they took money from somewhere else. But it was an on-the-spot purchase. It was just something as a reaction I did. And that was completely out of character. Then there's something in that that means something is being recreated. Now, it might be I get to 45 And I look back on my life and I think, well, when I was 18, I didn't think I'd be here. I thought I'd be somewhere else. I thought I'd be doing something else. So that process might be that triggers this response of, I'm going to do something that I wanted always to do, but I never had a chance to do it, without consequences of that choice being probably thought about. Where am I going to get the money from? How is it going to happen? And we get sucked into those kind of things without even realizing those patterns, those behavioral processes, because we are driven, all of us, by our emotions. We're not driven by things. Things don't drive us in our world and our life. Emotions do. And our emotions get us to do some pretty illogical stuff sometimes, because emotions normally don't follow logic. They're quite illogical as emotions. But they do drive us to make decisions, make choices, and connect to things. Now, for example, say you were growing up and you were taken away from an area of land, to live somewhere else because mum or dad got a new job, or things changed or whatever. And that process of the life that you were in, there was a particular smell. Maybe it was next to a lavender farm, for example. Yeah. So as you're growing up, that experience would be triggered by that connection to smell. It's somewhere I enjoyed, somewhere I liked, somewhere I lost. And this smell would be part of that experiential process. You could have other things, but we'll take that as an example. So as you get older, you smell lavender on somebody. Now that might draw you to that person, might draw you closer to that person, might make you connect to that person because there's a familiarity. There's something that says this connection was disconnected, so I'm going to connect. Or, alternatively, you could be connected to somebody and they then wear lavender and you could disconnect from them. So using one of your five senses, experiencing the world, it will drive you in a particular way. Now, those things, for me, are not unusual and not uncommon. I see them happening an awful lot when I start delving into why people do what they do. There is some process. So in my world, counselling world, if I look back at that experience and see it was that leaving that property, leaving that area that created that initial trauma from a child's perspective, then if we do some release work on that trauma, by understanding it, by writing about it, by expressing it, verbalizing it, looking at the components of it, so we go back on the timeline to find that initial occurrence and do some release work with it, then that shouldn't affect us as much. It might still affect us, but now we would know that if we smell lavender, we're not going to do an impulsive choice. We're going to think about, do I want to make that choice? Because I've taken it from a subconscious reaction, the emotion in lavender, to a conscious choice by understanding those components. Hopefully that made sense. It's a bit hard to get your head around sometimes, these kind of concepts. But it is one that I see an awful lot of, but it would always be around people who say to me, I've no idea why I did that choice. I've no idea why that occurred. I don't know what happened there. I didn't see that one coming. Those kind of processes where it comes straight out the blue. It's a reactionary choice. And I say emotions are always reactionary choices. So if we can understand the components of it, where it came from, then we have a choice whether we connect to this person who now wears lavender or disconnect from this person, because we know we have this susceptibility to the smell of lavender. And it makes us have informed choices from an experience. Then we're in charge of it. Then we're in control of it. Then we can make those kind of choices a lot more logically and a lot more in keeping with our world, so that it doesn't necessarily drive us off the edge of a cliff in our world. And we can have that choice of moving forward or not, as the case may be. Now, I've used one or two examples, but unfortunately for us human beings, in my world, how I understand it, the subconscious holds everything that's ever happened to us. Now, it probably wouldn't give us an understanding of anything that wasn't a negative experience. If it was a positive experience, that probably wouldn't make us make those illogical choices. It might do, but less common. Our subconscious usually hides the negative stuff that we do that's affected us or created a process to keep us safe, basically. So if it's a negative component, sometimes it will hide it from us to keep us safe, as I've said. You'll know that. And the easy way to understand that is if you've got times in your life where there's kind of black holes of time where nothing is in there, good or bad. That process usually means that the subconscious has wrapped it up. And that's why it's sometimes difficult when you do the timeline, because it allows a vehicle to externalize those thoughts, ideas, experiences onto a piece of paper. And the thing about writing things down, it kind of makes things real. I know they are real because things have happened to us. But our mind can move it around. Our mind can change it and alter it. It can dismiss it, basically. It can forget it. Yeah. But if we write it down and we put it on a piece of paper, then it becomes real. And it's sometimes hard to take that on. It's sometimes hard to look at that, to be fair, because those experiences that we've been through have been hidden for a reason. They're not necessarily things that are comfortable or things that we feel okay with. So when you're doing this timeline exercise, if indeed you want to, obviously, then just give yourself some space and time to do it. Don't try and hurry it. Don't try and do it in a half an hour, for example, or, when you've got, your lunch break. Try and give it some time, some space, some area where you've got that able to be emotionally awkward, emotionally sort of unsafe, if you like. So it's not a hurried exercise. It's one that, does sometimes take some time. But you might find that you do the timeline and you start a process of understanding, and then other things come back into your mind, other experiences, other situations, scenarios. And those are sometimes even more interesting than the things you remember straight off, because sometimes they've been hidden for more of a reason going forward. So sometimes when those things come to us after we've done the initial timeline, I say to people, just be a bit more kind of like exploratory of that, a bit more delving into it, because sometimes that's the subconscious saying, I wonder if you can cope with this. I'm going to let it out, but only a little trickle, and then I'm going to see whether or not you can cope with it. And that can sometimes be a lot more interesting as an exploration than the things that we can easily remember. Hopefully that made sense to understanding your world a bit more, which I think if we understand our world as much as we can understand it, can never fully understand it. None of us can. And we spend as counsellors a lot of time trying to understand our world, our personal world, should I say. But hopefully it made sense and given you some insight into why you might be doing what you're doing. If you feel like you would like to subscribe, share, like, please do so, because you never know who might be helped by the process that you're sending out or you're connected to people with. My name's Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. Take care. Enjoy. Hi, thanks for listening to the podcast, and hopefully it made sense and was interesting for you. Please subscribe, like and share. With the podcasts, you never know who will be helped by the things we talk about, things we share. We don't normally tell people our problems, but by sharing it and helping other people to understand things. The book Insecurity, It's All About Me, is also available now through Amazon, and it gives you an understanding of what drives insecurity, how insecurity works within our human dynamics, and how you can get a much more secure connection with people. It gives you lots of ideas and thoughts which is really good. So thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, share, hit the button. And if you've got any comments, please give me them and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks very much. Take care.